Contrary to what we've been taught about the Negroes, whose stories often claim to start during the transatlantic slave trade, monumental evidence shows that the social position in Egypt was substantially the same that it is now in the United States. That's more than 3,000 years ago. Some went even further to say that Ham, the youngest son of Noah, is not the forefather of the Negroes. This confirms that those they claim to have no history can actually trace their history back to Noah. And that's what we're going to prove through 7 distinct times in history. So, let's start with the present time. Because of slavery, yeah, because the forefathers have been subjugated for hundreds of years in America, the Negroes have lost every attribute required to be a nation. As a result, their identity has become a subject of great confusion. But of all the claims regarding their identity, there's always controversy when it comes to the claim of being the Israelites. And for some people, it is just impossible for the Negroes to be the Israelites. But if it's been proven they were strangers in Egypt and later enslaved by the Egyptians, a story that, according to the Bible, can only apply to the Israelites, and if it's also been proven the Israelites of old were people of that complexion, then we confirm that it's not impossible for the Negroes to be the Israelites. And to further explore that possibility, the time of the Haitian Revolution will be our focus point. When it comes to the Haitian Revolution, there's one thing upon which every eyewitness agreed, and that is that revolution was divine. To them, God's hand was the force behind the success of that revolution. That's why for Dessalines, strength was never about the number of Israeli soldiers, but about his mighty God, the one, he said, will go before them and face their enemies. Now, if the testimonies confirm that Haitians were able to achieve so many feats because they had defended Christ's faith, and we all know that Christ's faith was all about his father's business. So, was the Haitian Revolution about God's business? One of the first acts of Toussaint Louverture's was to require Haitian parents to raise their children in the fear of God. For the fear of God, according to him, was the only way to protect his people from the curses that had come upon them. That's why practices like voodoo or Freemasonry were strictly forbidden. History records that anyone caught practicing either one of them was likely to be executed, for according to Dessalines, such practices were sorceries. Another practice that was forbidden to Haitians was Christianity. History records how Toussaint once burned a church because the so-called priest was trying to lead his people into idolatry. Toussaint crushed the crucifix under his feet and saying, I don't want to serve that God. For the rejection of that image was the first order they received from Bookman. That's why Dessalines said, this idol, like Saturn, we trample it underfoot. Those people were known for despising that Greek Roman God, for they knew the true worshippers worship the Father in spirit and in truth. That's why all those who served them understood that their God is Yahweh and their Lord is Christ. For through all their actions, they always proved they were Christians. That's why Haitians were strict commandment keepers. Yeah, we have evidence that shows these people were Sabbath keepers. For according to the testimonies, keeping God's commands was part of their customs, and that customs, God's mortal covenant, as the Dessalines said, is what allowed them to become a free and civilized people. In fact, the testimonies confirm that the success in that revolution came from keeping God's commands, and that revolution was really about God's business. However, before we jump to conclusions about whether they are Israelites or not, we need to know where did they come from. Before slavery, we all agree that most of the Negroes came from Africa, the continent where the Israelites had migrated to escape different waves of persecution. And according to some historians, Israelites began settling in Africa in large numbers from the destruction of Jerusalem up until the Renaissance. That was when they established the Kingdom of Judah in Africa, which is why long before the rise of Christianity and Islam, Africans were known for embracing Israelite customs. Indeed, they observed God's law. However, Africans were among the first to betray the Israelites during the Renaissance. They sold them to European traders, just as the Bible had foretold, which is why a 1747 map shows that the Kingdom of Judah was the primary target of the transatlantic slave trade. For as the Africans mentioned, the Jews were ruined by both Africans and Europeans. In fact, those who were expelled from Jerusalem in 780 are the ones who were later persecuted in Europe and eventually became victims of the transatlantic slave trade. And those are the Israelites, God's chosen people. For wherever they were scattered, the West will become the place of their last captivity. And that's how we confirm that the Negroes are indeed the Israelites. So, To explore that story further, we're going to look at the time when they were in Europe, the time when they were also known as the Moors. According to Johnson's and Walker's English dictionaries, the word Moor simply means a Negro, and the term Negro, as we're going to prove it, is just another word used to describe a zealous Israelite, which is why it's been proven that the Jews are born Moors. They share the same customs. They were both known for despising their Trinity's doctrine. In fact, they despised everything that was not biblical. That's why they were blessed. These are the two witnesses who had power during the Dark Ages. They were behind every major scientific breakthrough of that time. And when it came to navigating the seas, they were masters. That's why it's been proven that the coast of Britain was visited by Jews long before the invasion of Caesar. Yeah, they were also the first to sail far beyond the pillars of Achilles. The first to know the way to the Americas, which is why an Israelite was forced to take part in Christopher Columbus' first expedition. And this confirms that all the inhabitants of the Americas prior to Columbus were indeed the Israelites. They were the 10 tribes mentioned by his past. Those went forth into a further land where no one had ever lived, all because they wanted to keep God's commands. That's why it's been proven that Native Americans followed the same exact custom as the Jews. They avoided swine flesh, wore fringes, and even know how to speak Hebrew. Yeah, these people know how to recite the Shema in Paleo Hebrew. All this shows that nothing happens by chance. The Israelites ruled for a time, and there was peace. However, during the Renaissance, when the eagle was restored again to its beginning, the Israelites became the first targets of the wrath of that beast. It waged war against my people, overcame them, and killed them. And that was the time of the Inquisition. At that time, Israelites were persecuted for obeying God's commands. They were pursued and baited like wild animals. That is when those who escaped the Inquisition found Africa, the place where some of their brethren were already living, to be their only hope. But that hope didn't last long because it wasn't long before the Africans became their second greatest enemies. Yeah, they sold my people. For the whole race of my people, wherever they were scattered, was condemned to slavery. And that was the time of the beginning of the transatlantic slave trade. The time when ships were provided to bend my people just because they were the chosen. Yeah. Over time, the population of my people was disappearing in Europe, for all the remnants of these people were taken into captivity. And that is exactly what was foretold to happen. So, that's what the Lord foretold to happen to these people in the last days. It all started with a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, and that woman is the whole nation of Israel, the nation from which a Messiah was expected, the one the world called Jesus Christ. And it continued with another wonder in heaven, and behold, a great white dragon, and that dragon is the whole nation of Edom, the nation behind the Roman Empire, the one the Lord called the devil, for he is the one that will deceive the world. These are the people who have dominated the Jews. That's why Herod the Great, an Edomite, was appointed as the king of Judea. He is the one who have sought to devour the child as soon as he was born. And it was after the child was called up unto God, the Roman army, led by Titus, besieged Jerusalem, which is why the woman had to flee the city in 70 AD. And about 400 years after that siege, the Lord, through these angels, brought down the Roman Empire, and that was the beginning of the Dark Ages, the time when the great eagle was in peril of failing, when 2 wings of that eagle were given to the woman. The ammunition was given to the Israelites. They had power to smite the earth without plagues. That's why the Israelites were accused of causing the earthquakes in 1016. And it was at this moment the enemies remembered how powerful are these people when they keep God's commands, which is why the dragon was wroth with the woman and went to make war with the remnant of her seed. And as we all know, that was the beginning of the time of the Inquisition, the time when religion was used to wage war against my people for keeping God's commands through Christ. Yeah, the time came to pass when whosoever killed an Israelite thought he had done God's service. Now, after the Inquisition, all the children of Israel were brought to captivity, for the woman shall go forth out of the city, dwell in the field, then go even to Babylon. And Babylon, America, which is also spiritually called Egypt, is the place of my people's last captivity, the place where they shall be delivered from the hand of their enemies. For everything that is written concerning Jacob shall come to pass. And all that shows that everything that happened to Jacob was part of God's plan, for they shall be tried as gold in the fire, which is why one of the signs before the end of the world is that Israel shall be first delivered up to be afflicted. For Jesus Christ's mission was to get his people ready for the great tribulation, and that tribulation is the only way to the kingdom. For since Adam has failed to keep God's commands, the access to the tree of life was restricted. Now it belongs only to those among the children of Israel who will overcome the world. These are the elect, the ones God chose to inherit the kingdom from the foundation of the world. So, to fully understand that story, we must go back to the beginning. Let's start at the beginning. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. Then on the sixth day, he created Adam and gave him dominion over all things. For that, he gave him instructions of what to do and what to not do. But Adam has transgressed those commands. Immediately, the Lord appointed death in him and his generations. And those that came after Adam believed they had freedom to do whatever they will. They despised God's commands. In consequence, the Lord put the flood upon them and wiped them out, except for one man and his household, and that man, as we all know, was Noah. Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. These are the fathers of all nations. Among those 3, the Lord chose the seed of Shem for a covenant. To be more specific, he chose Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel, is the father of the Israelites, and these are the people who were chosen for the covenant. They are the ones who have made a covenant with God by sacrifice. And that covenant came to pass when Moses sprinkled the blood on the children of Israel, after they all agreed to what was written on the book of the covenant. Yeah, this all happened after the Lord brought them out of the land of Egypt into Mount Sinai, where he gave them the law, the statutes, and the commandments, and that was the beginning of the First Testament. During that time, sacrifices were needed for whosoever Israelites transgressed God's commands. That's why they were bound to the sanctuary, and consequently, they were bound to Jerusalem. Because since the Lord had given them the land, Jerusalem became the place where all sacrifices were to be brought. That's why, despite all the captivity before 70 AD, the Lord always left them some priests in Jerusalem. Yeah, there were always some Israelites left to make intercession for the people, which is why, right before 70 AD, he sent his only begotten Son to be the intercessor for these people. For as we all know, the Israelites will be led away captive. Jerusalem will be trodden down by the Gentiles, and there will be no one left in that city. Which is why when the Samaritan woman asked about the place of worshipping, Jesus Christ said unto her, Woman, believe me, the hour cometh, when ye shall neither in this mountain, nor yet at Jerusalem worship the Father. Because from that hour, the Israelites were no longer bound to Jerusalem, for that hour was the beginning of the time of the New Testament. Yeah. From that hour, sacrifices were no longer required for an Israelite to receive forgiveness of sin, for the blood of Christ was a sin offering. His blood was poured unto death for the transgression of my people. He was afflicted for the sins. For suffering is what he came to fulfill. He came to suffer for to give repentance to Israel. Now, having been sent to bear the sins of my people, Jesus Christ was also sent to teach them how to perfectly keep the law. That's why he goes so far as to tell them to be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father which is in heaven is perfect. That is also why he warned them by saying, Whosoever therefore shall break one of these least commandments, and shall teach men so, he shall be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. For keeping God's commands is what will bring us into life. And that's the life Moses told us to choose when he had set before us the cursing and the blessing. A blessing if we keep God's commands, and a curse if not. That is also the law God told us to remember before the great day of the Lord. For anyone that shall be saved shall be able to escape by his works, and by faith, whereby he hath believed. That is also why Jesus Christ revealed that they that may have right to the tree of life are they that do the commandments. So, keep God's commands. In fact, we have confirmed that the Negros are not Hamites, they are Shemites. They come from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They are the Israelites. We have also confirmed that the story did not start with the transatlantic slave trade, but started since the foundation of this world, for even this world was made for their sake. We have also learned that nothing happens by chance. Everything is prophetic. Yeah, The rivalry between Jacob and Esau is prophetic, and it started from Rebekah's bowels. For when the children struggled together within her, two nations were in her womb, two manners of people. And we also know that when Esau will have dominion, his main target will always be his brother Jacob. Yeah, from the Greek Empire to the present time, Esau's main target has always been Jacob, starting with Antiochus. He went straight against the early covenant after he had smitten the Egyptians. He is the one who, during the Greek kingdom, has set up the abomination of desolation. He commanded his army to put to death whosoever was found keeping God's law. However, thanks to some of my people who have trusted their God, Antiochus has failed in his mission, and that was the fulfillment of Daniel 11. Titus, a general of the Roman Empire, now vital Jerusalem was to the Israelites, decided to destroy the city to cause the sacrifice to cease. Titus and his people thought they accomplished something, but they failed. For as we all know, thanks to the Lord's sacrifice, the Israelites were no longer bound to Jerusalem, and sacrifices for sins were no longer required. However, Titus' action is the reason why a lot of Israelites have believed, for the siege of Jerusalem was the beginning of the Great Tribulation, and that was the fulfillment of Daniel 9. Despite the Great Tribulation, the Israelites were known for being the most knowledgeable people in the world, for by keeping the law through Christ, they were able to build the wall. However, it wasn't until the Renaissance era that Esau started unleashing hell upon my people. He condemned to death every single one of them keeping God's commands. And as time went on, he condemned all the remnants of these people into slavery. That's why it's been proven that Jacob was not only found in Africa, but also in Antioch, the place where they were first recorded as being called Negros. My people were also found in Europe. Sometimes they were called Jacobites, meaning the sons of Jacob, and other times they were known as Moors, which was a name given to the Spaniards. But the native of Spain were Israelites, which is why it's been proven that the Jews, the Spaniards, and the Jacobites were people of black complexion. These people were taken from all those places just to be enslaved alongside those in the Americas. For the Native Americans, regardless of whether the skin complexion is dark or light, are God's chosen people. And that was the fulfillment of Nehemiah 1 verse 9. For no matter where they were scattered, the Lord will gather them from the west, for the west is the place where the children of Israel and the children of Judah were oppressed together. And all that happened to Jacob just because of the curses, and those curses, as we all know, are upon these people for a sign. That's why one of the pieces of evidence Dessalines presented to prove that Negroes and Native Americans are one family is the curses, for the same calamities have waited upon these people's head. They also shared the same testimony concerning the oppression in America. Yeah, we have records of the Negroes saying that if they had not first forsaken and violated the law of the God, none of those calamities would have come upon them. While the Native Americans said that all those punishments happened because of their many sins. Both groups acknowledged that the failure to keep God's commands was the cause of the oppression, which is why one of the first acts of Toussaint and Dessalines during the Haitian Revolution was to get the people to keep God's commands. For even in the early 19th century, the truth was not yet fully hidden. But today, in our time, that truth has been cast down. For since power was given unto the beast, what was once the truth has since been twisted into a lie. The people whom the Lord called holy and special have since been called monkeys and savages, and they destroyed them. For their dead bodies shall be seen by all nations for a time. That's why they lost their identity. However, the time cometh when the Spirit of life shall enter into their bodies. Yes, the dry bones of my people shall live. For when the Lord shall see there is no man, his arm shall bring salvation. The elect of my people shall be delivered, and that will be the time of the return of Jesus Christ. As it is written, right before the return of the Messiah, he shall gather the nations for the last world war. He shall bring them to the place called Armageddon, where he shall judge the nations for what they have done to my people. And just before the destruction, the elect of my people shall ascend into heaven. The enemy shall behold them, then shall they know with the sons of the living God. And when the indignation be overpassed, he shall bring them back to their land. Yeah, he shall be king to them, and there shall be no more two nations. That will be the time when those who have kept his covenant shall receive the promises. He shall cause them to walk in his statutes, and to them there shall be no more death, neither sorrow, nor crying. And finally, he shall cause my people to take the kingdom and possess that kingdom forever and even forever. In those days, nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more, for they shall diligently learn the ways of my people. And that will be the complete story of the Negroes.